name's Carter Collette, and today I'm going to teach you the tips and tricks and how to own a baitcaster fishing pole. So yeah, a little fun fact to start off. Did you know that according to Statista, fishing is one of the most popular outdoor activities in the United States? So kind of not surprising, but there's a lot of outdoor activities out there, so fishing wins it all, I guess. And yeah, so I've owned a baitcaster since I was like 12 years old, and I'm 17 now. This was actually my first baitcaster, in fact, and I've gone through a lot of trial and error myself. So today I hope I can teach you some tips and tricks and how to pick out your first pole and some do's and do nots, and I hope you don't run into as many obstacles as I do after this. Listen to this speech. So yeah, to get started, you're going to need a pole and a reel, a combo. They call it a combo, a pole and a reel. So I would recommend going to your nearest outdoors store, going to their fishing section and picking out a baitcaster. So a power I would recommend, which power is like the stiffness of your rod. A power I would recommend is medium heavy, because medium heavy is a good middle ground. So it goes light, medium, medium heavy, heavy. And it's pretty common. Most people would agree that medium heavy is a good middle ground, and it'll suffice for a lot of different line lures that you're going to be using. So it's got a broad spectrum for everything. So yeah, pick a medium heavy. 7 foot is usually a good height. It's a little long, but I'd say 7 foot is good because you get a lot more power and maneuverability in that. So that's what I recommend, is picking a 7 foot medium heavy. And also one thing I want to touch on is you get what you pay for. So I think when I was 12, I saved up all my money and paid like $180 at the time for this setup. And it's been a great setup for like 5 years. So it just kind of goes to show that you get what you pay for. And if you want to spend $100, don't expect it to last 10 years, and don't expect it to be the most high quality thing ever. So, and if you plan on being in it for a while, then maybe go spend $180, $200 on something like this that'll last you a long time. So yeah, after you pick out your pole and your reel, they usually come in combos, but after you have that, you got to know all the buttons. So the first button I want to touch on is the spool release. So that would be your thumb button right here, and that's going to let go of the spool. So if you've ever used any kind of other fishing pole, that's what lets go of the line so that it can go flying out into the lake or the pond. So that'll let go of your line so you can cast it out. And that's the thumb button. You press that with your thumb. And when you go back to reel your line in, it'll just automatically start going. You'll know when it clicks. So another thing I want to touch on is brakes. So your brakes are going to be how fast your spool spins when you let go of that spool and press that thumb button. So if you're new to it, I would recommend that you turn your brakes all the way up, because then it's going to reduce your likeliness of backlash and knots and a bunch of crazy things that you don't want to deal with, I promise you. And yeah, so that's your brakes, and your brakes will be on the opposite side of your handle, on the side of your reel. So the next thing I want to touch on is the tensioner knob. So you're here, it's this little knob that clicks when you spin it. It's kind of like a little dial. Your tensioner knob is like fine-tuning your brakes. So yeah, just imagine it as the tighter you tighten it, the slower that your lure is going to fly out there, and it's going to hold on to it a little bit tighter. So that's your tensioner knob. If you've ever used a fishing pole before, you'll know about drag. So this is your drag. This is another little dial right next to your handle. Your drag is a big thing. You'll have to fine tune that to your line, but those are all the controls that you'll need to know when using a bait casting pole. So now we can talk about fishing scenarios and how to use all the controls and how to set up your pole and what lure to use in certain fishing scenarios. So to start off, I want to talk about how to set up your lure once you get it tied on. So you figured out what you want to use, whether that's a frog or a jig or a spinnerbait that's on here. One thing that, a good rule of thumb that you want to start off with is your tensioner knob. You want to set, since you're new to it, you want to set your brakes all the way to max, and then you want to let your spool go. So click it, and then release your tensioner knob really slow until it gets to a slow fall, like that. So then you're less likely to get birds cast, but it'll still go pretty far out there, so you'll be good to go. So that's a good rule of thumb when you get a lure on there. You just want a slow fall, and you should be good to go. The next thing I want to touch on is line. So line is a huge debate across fishermen, but I would say two big things that you can pick from are braided line and monofilament line. So the line that's on here is monofilament. Some of the cons with monofilament are the diameter is usually a lot thicker than braid. So you can have a 45-pound braided line and a 10-pound monofilament line, and it could be the same diameter depending on the quality of each. So you usually get a lot thicker diameter line when it comes to monofilament, no matter how the quality. Another drawback that comes with monofilament is it always has memory, and it gets weathered really easily. So if you leave it out in the cold all winter, depending on where you live, and if you leave it out and let it rain and get sun on it and all that bad stuff, it'll get cracked and it'll conform. The line will get memory and conform to the spool of the reel, and then you'll get a bunch of knots and it won't be fun, and the line won't be near as strong. Whereas braid doesn't get near as weathered. It doesn't really have memory for your reel, and so braid it really just comes with its pros and cons. So I would recommend, if you're using topwater, use braid so you can set that hook good, and braid usually floats, so you should be good to go with that. But if you're using something like a Senko or spinnerbait, then you should be using monofilament. At least I would recommend. You can always do what you want, but that's what I would recommend. Just because the argument is that if it's in the water, fish can see braid a lot easier than they can monofilament, so ideally you'd want monofilament if you're fishing kind of down in the water. Whereas topwater, you're on top of it anyway, and those fish are kind of impulsively hitting it and not really thinking much about it. So yeah, some tips and tricks. If you have a big fish and your line isn't quite as strong, something you can do is when that fish turns around and decides to dart off again and take another fight, you can let go of your spool and click it as if you were going to cast, but keep your thumb on your spool and let it swim when it needs to. And another thing that's awesome about the drag on this reel is that you can tighten it and loosen it as you're fighting that fish or casting or reeling. So there's a lot of versatility that comes with it. So ideally, bait casting reels are for skilled anglers only, but just like any skill, I mean, it's hard at first, but you can refine it and become great at it at the end. So yeah, overall, after hearing my speech, I hope you don't run into as many obstacles as I did when I started, and you can start to understand things like, how to pick out your pole, all the controls, and some tips and tricks that come with it. So yeah, get out there and go fishing.